Welcome. Welcome to the webinar series on reaching scale and access to energy. Welcome back to those of you who already joined us last week when we discussed entering the next frontier markets, overcoming challenges for solar success beyond peri-urban areas of East Africa in India. Just to let us know how many of you actually did participate. We have prepared a little poll for you. Let us know. Okay, as you're coming in. That's good. So let us count down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we've got a slight majority for no. So for those of you who did not participate, please go to our event page. You can review the whole webinar there. Today, in the second part of the series, we will focus on scaling up finance, innovative structured financing for solar companies. The webinar is brought to you by the Inclusive Business Action Network, IBAN, Hystra, and the Practitioner Hub for Inclusive Business. My name is Markus Dietrich, and I'm responsible for policy and private sector at the global platform promoting inclusive business through knowledge and research, partnership and networking, as well as policy dialogue. Now, as you know who I am, let us know who you are. For this, I'd like to ask you to quickly answer this poll. See. Tell us about you. Do you work for a solar company, private sector company, NGO, financial institution, government donor, research, or others? So, quite a few solar companies here, private companies coming up. Okay, 3, 2, 1. What's the result? So others are the winners, so we have to find a few new categories next time, man. But we do have quite a few solar companies and other private sector companies with us. So that was good for us to know, for the panelists to know, so we can address the questions of you accordingly. So I will be shortly introducing the panelists. We will hear an overview of findings from Hystra research on scaling up finance. We'll then have a discussion among the panelists, and we will have a Q&A session. To facilitate this, please type in your questions in the chat function at any time. We will record and present and have the presentation ready at the event page. And you can also join the discussion on Twitter, #EnergyAccess. So I've done that already. And then let's get started. Let me introduce the panelists. We've got François Lepicard, Network Partner at Hystra, Piyush Mathur, CEO of Symphony Works, Molly Doyle from USAID, Scaling Off-Grid Energy, and myself as the moderator. The basis of this webinar is the report of Hystra, Reaching Scale and Access to Energy, which was sponsored by IBAN, ADB Responsibility, Schneider Electric, SDC, Total, and USAID. And I'm very happy to have one of the authors, François Lepicard, with me, as well as those two representatives from organization which were represented in this research. So now, to introduce themselves, I will hand over to François to kick out the round of introductions.
Slide, Marcus.
There we are.
Thank you. So my name is François Lepicard, I'm a partner at Hystra. Hystra is a consulting firm specialized in supporting the private sector in promoting market-based solutions to social problems. It was founded in early 2009 by Olivier Kaiser, formerly head of Ashoka UK and France. And the rest you can read on the slide. We design and implement hybrid strategies, i.e. innovative business models with a game-changing social impact. Over to you, Piyush. Piyush?
Hello, everyone. My name is Piyush Mathur, and I'm the CEO of Symphony Works. We are an energy access business in India, and what we do is integrate solar devices with point-of-sale financing and doorstep service to make energy available and accessible to our rural poor people. We have a very simple model where we install solar home systems for a small upfront payment, and we then top up their systems by collecting small recharges, and whatever they pay every month adds towards the cost of ownership and ultimately leads to ownership. On the following page, you will see what our typical systems look like. You will see that they come with a solar panel which goes on the rooftop, battery units which goes inside their home, and energy efficient appliances, 3 to 4 light fittings, a fan, in some cases TV as well, but in all cases mobile charging ports. That's essentially what we do, and I'll tell you more about ourselves as we go through this webinar.
Thank you, Piyush. Now over to Molly.
Great. So I'm Molly Doyle, a Senior Advisor on the Scaling Off-Grid Energy team within the the Global Development Lab of USAID. So Scaling Off-Grid Energy is a partnership initiative between USAID, Power Africa, DFID, the Shell Foundation, and the African Development Bank, with the aim of assisting companies to deliver clean, modern, affordable energy products and services to 20 million households across sub-Saharan Africa. So given the fact that over 600 million people still lack access to electricity, there's a significant need for large-scale financing to accelerate the sector. Can we go to the next slide? So we work across several different levels of the market. We use direct company grants to target specific market expansion or technology innovation, and are increasingly moving to support financial intermediaries with the capacity to support multiple companies across the sector in order to increase our leverage. Number 2, we work to drive demand, supporting innovation on both the appliance and productive use side. And then 3, we work to strengthen the market ecosystem as a whole. So we're targeting specific market barriers such as mobile money penetration to help accelerate pay-as-you-go solar household system distribution. So while USAID is able to provide infusions of grant capital to the sector, we do recognize the current financing gap really significantly limits the capacity of the industry to scale, especially the lack of affordable local currency lending opportunities in countries of operation.
Thank you very much, Molly. Thank you all. And I look forward to exploring the issue of innovative finance and structured finance for solar companies with you in the participants in the coming hour. But before we hear from the experts, we like again to listen to the collective wisdom of the participants and hear from you what the top 3 actions to scale finance for access and what the top issues really are. So we will now see again what have we picked out. What are the biggest issue in financing the growth of access to energy? Banks just don't get it. Foreign currency risk and availability. Equity support is scarce. It's very expensive to set up an SPV. Customer debt can't be refinanced. It's a cash economy. Money isn't the issue. Please answer. So the first one, banks just don't get it. What else do you think? Equity. Equity is raising. What do you think the issues are? So this poll will actually give our panelists an idea about where you think the issue is, so we can spend a little more time on that. So yeah, so the banks are the culprit, definitely. Okay, let's run it down now. 4, 5, 3, 2, 1. Okay. So the panelists, according to our audience's collective wisdom, banks just don't get it. So next time we should have a bank in here so they can tell, but I'm sure you will find some more innovative ways on making the banks understand what the issues are. So let me now finish here and hand over to Francois for the panel discussion. Over to you.
Don't get it is a different answer. I think you're right, but I think also we'll see to that later, but there's quite a long way to go for banks to get it. Let me talk about the report. The report is actually a follow-up on our first report on access to energy that happened in 2009. Then the main aim was to actually identify solutions to access populations that couldn't swap to electricity mainly or to cook stoves. In our recent report, we decided to focus on scaling. Now that we know the solutions exist, how fast can they reach the people? We did it, as in the first case, by building on the voice of practitioners, i.e. private companies involved in providing solutions to the access to energy, through 26 case studies on companies offering lanterns, SHS, cook stoves, water pumps, and mini-grid services. And they told us what is holding back their growth, and this is what we actually synthesized and are trying to restitute. Again, the sponsor to the study were USAID, also panelists, the ADB, SDC, the Swiss Corporation, GIZ and IBAN, our mediator, Total, Schneider Electric, and Responsibility, the Swiss Impact Investing Fund. There were two key conclusions to the study. One is private practitioners are failing to reach the poorest and the marginal customers in partially electrified areas. This selling in those areas was the point of the first seminar. The second one is the regulatory and financial environment is not helping enough. For the most innovative solutions, pay-as-you-go and mini-grids, lack of finance is holding back growth, and this is what we're going to talk about this afternoon. Before we actually get started, I think it would be worthwhile to have a look at a fairly comprehensive solution for pay-as-you-go as it has been put in place by SIMPA, because that will introduce most of the concepts and the issues we're going to talk about for the rest of the seminar. Over to you, Piyush.
As the holy grail in our sector, our capital staff sector, is to unlock or find a way of unlocking domestic capital. And I'm pleased to inform you that we have found a way here in India, working with the banks. What we have done is created a very simple end-user financing model, which is very similar to how all of us buy cars today. We buy the car from the car company, and then we get financing from a associated financial institution. Similarly, today, our customers are actually buying solar assets from us, and at the same time, as a prepackaged offering, receiving financing from our banking partners. Under this structure, as you can see on the page, there's simple 4 steps. SIMPA sells solar home systems to the customers for a small upfront payment, which acts as a deposit towards mortgage equivalent loan that they now get for their energy device. SIMPA bears all the transaction costs and process costs of arranging that financing from the bank. Banks then directly disburse the loan to customer, but actually to SIMPA on behalf of the customer. So we receive our money as product sellers upfront. And then lastly, SIMPA takes responsibility for collecting the money on behalf of the bank and then deposit it with the bank at the end of every day. What you see here is a model where we are leveraging our respective strengths. Banks understand lending, banks understand financing, and that's what they're doing. Banks do not have a field distribution model. They do not have a loan distribution model, and that's where SIMPA steps in and first originates the loan for them, and then also then acts as a collection agent collecting the money for them. Back to you, Francois.
Thank you. What I find interesting about SIMPA is that this is actually addressing several of the issues with bank lending. Let me go back a bit. When we initiated the research, we looked at the whole array of access to energy solutions, from the historical ones, which are grid extension, then came lanterns, and in the past, say 10 to 15 years, a whole array of very innovative solutions in very different fields, mini grids for off-grid distributed energy, SHS for a sophisticated and more powerful system, microgrids for very remote areas, biodigested productive appliances. What all these businesses have in common is that they deliver a very highly addictive product, which is energy, and specifically one of its variants, which is harmless, which is electricity. So energy is something that once you get some, you want more, and the removal symptoms of losing access to energy are severe depression and physical pain. So it's a dream business, really. It's a business where your customers are going to buy over and over again. So for a lender, it has all the guarantees of. Yes, you're right. Sorry, one comment on there are a few missings, but we were actually missing space. Sorry, back to the flow. However, if you look at all these players, except for the grid extension players, they're all financed through equity. In fact, barring the ITCOL case, there was no significant lending to the ITCOL in Bangladesh. There was no significant lending to the off-grid energy field until 2016. Then why is that? Over to the next page. We don't think it's an issue of need, because as you see, this is basically describing the business model for distributing a solar device. The carrying cost of your inventory, because in most cases you have to pay cash on order to a Chinese supplier, is nearly requires something in the magnitude of $50 of balance sheet, $400 of sales. Why? First of all, it takes essentially 3 months to bring the product in the country, and the second part, it takes another 3 months to take it from the country to the customer at the minimum. And then if you delivering credit to your customer, you have to add on average 1 year. So it's a 6 to 18 month delay between the time when you pay for your good and the time you actually get the cash back. Which has two consequences. The first one is that you need $50 of capital for $100 of sales. The second one is that you need something that you actually think you're buying 100 is actually costing you something like $120 in the best cases, which has had practical consequences for the business model, i.e. that the suppliers of solutions were trying to focus on customers who could very quickly buy their products so that they didn't have to hold them for longer, hence the focus on suburban areas, hence the half-baked retailing solutions, and so on and so forth. I think this sets the case for why it's actually important to find a solution to the financing issue. Over to the next slide. Resolving that financing issue requires to look at 4 different aspects of the financing mechanism. The first one is to help your lender reduce processing cost and risk, i.e. helping banks get it. And the other 3 are looking at your balance sheet and your business model process so that you can find the right way to lay your hands on some money. Well, lots of comment here. Let's move on. Let me take the point of view of the bank. As you see, it's actually very difficult to lend money at a small business you don't understand. The first one is basically the health of the concern you're lending money to. The second one is how much it's going to cost me for what kind of benefit. The third one is if something goes wrong. One is, are there any guarantees that I can lay quickly my hands on? And the second one is, if even with these guarantees, what's the likelihood that I do get them back? The fifth one, the seventh one is where do I come in the order of priorities? The eighth one is, can I sell the loan back? Sorry, can I sell back the loan to someone else? And the eighth one, am I not not better off buying treasury bonds? These issues basically they come to three things. Some things that energy companies can do something about, i.e., how, and that's what Piyush is doing through the pass-through system of consumer. How can I give a guarantee that there is going to be revenue for the lending that I get in a as simple as possible way? And the other big side of, how can I make it cheap and easy for the bank to give me money, basically? And the other one is there a pipe that will channel the pots of money that are available for development finance into some kind of products I can use? Hence the secondary markets, hence the dedicated funding mechanisms. I'll stop there for a while and hand over to Piyush and to Molly. Piyush, can you comment a bit more on the way you managed to convince the bank that the initial payments from the customer was a good triggering factors for providing the loan?
Yes, thank you, Francois. And in the process, I will also answer some of the questions that have come on the chat.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think the key in giving confidence to the banks and engaging them was to first educate them on our business model and educate them on how, in the first place, we are mitigating many of the risks that they also regard as unacceptable, and we also regard as unacceptable. So the first step was to make them comfortable that, look, we think like you, we understand that we need to mitigate our risks here, but please come and review our internal processes, look at our lending policies, look at our customer onboarding policies to get comfortable that we are mitigating many of the risks that you might be worried of. The second thing then was to agree a workflow with them, which could actually enable us to process a very large number of cases very quickly. So at the moment, we are processing anywhere up to 250 cases every day, and that has to happen at a very high velocity. And our turnaround times for application to installation for customers is less than 48 hours. So the whole cycle has to run very quickly, which means loads and loads of transaction costs. So we had to propose to them a model wherein they are not bearing any additional transaction costs, and it's still very viable for them to lend money here. And the third key factor here was, and there was a question about this as well, giving them confidence on our credit quality, plus also the fact that we as a young developing business will play our part and will perform our set of obligations under our agreement with them. Our set of obligations being that we will send out people to customers' homes to collect the money. Our part of obligations being that we will originate the customer as per the agreed policy, which is auditable by them, but then we have to follow that on a day-to-day basis. And our part of the obligations being that we have to provide technical service so that the customers have continued use of the equipment and continue paying for it. So to be absolutely clear, we have provided them a first loss guarantee. That first loss guarantee is less than the quantum of the portfolio loss that we see in our portfolio, which means that it is not seeking to mitigate credit risk for them. The bank is now comfortable, having looked at our credit record and credit history, to take the credit risk. But that first loss guarantee is a simplified way for the bank to ensure that SIMPA would be performing its part of the contract, which is technical service, right origination, and finally collections. So I hope this point is clear, because I want you all to take away a very clear message that the first loss guarantees do not always mitigate the credit risk of the banks. The first loss guarantee can also provide them confidence that we will play our part of the deal.
Thank you, Piyush. I mean, there are two elements I wish to emphasize. One is that you have to be able to give an idea of the quality of your client selection process, and to give an idea of the quality of your portfolio, which means that you've been able to measure it systematically, provide assurance to the bank that what you're showing to them is all that what you have. That's one. That's the basically proving your history to be predictable in terms of risk. Again, predictable doesn't mean no risk. It means a risk that I can actually measure. The second one, the second big item, especially, which is a feat, especially in India, where mobile money is not always coming in handy, is to be able to actually transfer the payment information to the bank to trigger the loan in a very, very short time, so that you have an information sharing channel with your bank that makes the fund come not 6 months after you need them, which is another big issue. Molly, I would like you more to comment on the actual channel issue, i.e., question one is why should I mean, you know, local governments pay actually a pretty decent interest rates, and they are, you know, they borrow big amounts, so they are natural clients. Why should I not just buy treasury bonds as a bank rather than lend to small businesses in a very obscure energy field? The second one is if I have too many of those loans, is there any way I can actually offload them to someone else?
Sure. So unfortunately, in a lot of the markets we're working in terms of off-grid energy, a lot of the commercial banks offering local currency lending in country are still very hesitant to lend to small businesses. And this is due to often to perceived, not actual risk, and just the smaller ticket sizes that are just not worth the high transaction costs in most banks. I will mention that USAID has technical assistance providers and loan guarantee providers on the ground working with local banks. Right now, we're particularly focused in West Africa to basically just help increase access to local lending, lower that cost of capital. But commercial bank lending still largely remains a pretty costly engagement before companies really reached kind of that critical growth stage. I'll also mention that in recent years, we have seen quite a few really interesting non-traditional financing products and vehicles emerge to address this challenge. So you've seen also a lot of crowdfunding platforms have a lot of success in this space. So companies like Fundfunder or Treen, for example, are often kind of alternatives that are providing critical working capital lending to the sector.
Right. I think I'm ready to move on to the next slide. Okay. Going back to our business process, I mean, I think we've touched on many of those points already. Thank you, Molly. So basically, first of all, there was a comment here is that if you add in, custom duties and VATs, which I didn't for the sake of simplification, you come up with the full cost, which is more like 150 to 160 rather than 120. I didn't put it in here because I didn't see was part of the financing issue, but it's actually a big margin point. Basically, you have two sets of solutions. One is the one that Sympa is actually being using is back-to-back consumer finance. The precursor of that system was called in Bangladesh, except that called in Bangladesh lent to the company anything between 60 and 80% of the lending they were providing to their own clients, so that they didn't have to actually monitor each client's payment, or were able to do more like bulk lending, but it's essentially the same principle that as the Sympa one, except that ITCOL had the means to not monitor as closely as the Sympa bank deal requires. What helped is that ITCOL was government supported. In this system, what you need is to be able to prove that, on one side, the company needs to prove that their client selection process is healthy. This is essentially for pay-as-you-go company and for mini grids. And what the bank needs to have is a tap for specific energy consumer finance products, which is typically what Molly was outlining as one of the options earlier on. Some players who would be natural contributors to that, but have not been, with very few exceptions, are MFIs, because they know the same clients. The reason why MFIs are not there yet is are basically twofold. One part of the reason is that in many cases, access to energy appliances are not considered productive appliances, and MFI are dedicated to support small businesses. The second reason is that some MFIs have been selling or distributing or financing solar lanterns as top-up to microfinance loan, but the bigger devices are too expensive to come as a simple top-up. That was part one. Piyush, any additional comment on consumer finance?
Yes, I think your characterization of how the financing cycle operates for energy access is actually very comprehensive and nice. But the additional point I'll make is that how the way we have been financing ourselves or alleviating a lot of this cash strain in the business is by financing the first cycle through trade finance and working capital facilities, exactly like you have proposed here. So this is inventory finance. The other thing that we have done is completely localized our procurement. So that also, in a way, alleviates or mitigates the working capital requirements in the business.
Yeah.
At the point from which we have acquired the asset to the point when we have deployed it to the customer and are sort of haven't fully recovered the money, we're obviously now using multiple types of facilities. So one type of facility that we're using is this end user financing from the bank, which is akin to consumer finance in many ways, but we are still using on-balance sheet loans. And I expect that in a steady state, we will continue to have a combination of on-balance sheet sources for on-lending money to our customers, and also off-balance sheet sources like the ones we have from the banks.
Right. Molly, on the consumer finance activities? Yeah.
This is a great overview. And just to add to your last point, I think so many companies are setting up their own off-balance sheet SPV at this point, which is extremely expensive and takes quite a bit of time in terms of both legal costs and structuring. I think the key is really to, a lot of what we do on our side is working with different financial intermediaries to make sure those products are accessible and quick so that working capital can be available as needed. It seems really inefficient. Those companies are doing everything themselves these days in terms of verticalization. So they're a bank, they're a utility, they're a fast-moving consumer goods company, and that's incredibly difficult to manage. You can't excel in all of those areas. So to have every company within the sector setting up their own SPV, it's becoming a bit cumbersome, and I understand is also very expensive and time-consuming for companies. So we are really trying to push just to make sure those products are affordable, appropriate, and available when needed. So.
Right. Thanks a lot. Cool. This is the most innovative part. I think Piyush touched on the trade finance issue. These products are actually not yet widely available. Hedging the currency issue, i.e. being able to borrow in I put French CFA francs, but basically being able to borrow in local currency. Local currency was too long to write. And pay in dollars, so you'd cover the currency risk because that's actually not in the chart, i.e. the variation between the dollar and the local currency, which over 6 months to a year can be pretty significant, and also the financing of the logistics. These products, which are pretty standard in other parts of the trade, are very underdeveloped in the access to energy, and I'm not really sure why, except for the reluctance of the banks to actually provide trade finance for very small deals. And the second one is inventory finance, where the industry is actually making progress. I don't think it's going to take very long before some products happen here. The big issue in inventory finance is, again, i.e. selling your inventory to the bank until you can actually sell it to your customer, and then when you sell it to the customer, buying it back from the bank. This needs two things. One is just-in-time electronic treatment of your inventory, which is happening in some of the players, and the second one is a resale value for the inventory, so that the bank can actually make sure that A, all the goods that you say are in inventory, and B, if you don't pay, they can close the inventory and sell it back. Again, this is a pretty straightforward market that requires that the value of the product that you are selling be recognized. That's coming. Given the usual inertia of banks, I think it's going to be another 3 to 5 years before it's a standard product. I'm eagerly awaiting the first bank who's going to put in place an inventory financing mechanism. I'll touch last on the asset finance. That's essentially for grid operators. Grid operators are in a very different situation than most of the players, in that they put assets on the ground which have as main value, which have value only for local residents, because these assets can't be moved away. Most of these assets can't be moved away. So having a bank lend against those assets actually increases the safety for the grid operator, because it's got an ally in keeping the value of the assets up, which means essentially that the main grid is not going to reach the area where you set up your grid. Again, there is a clear value creation deal in having been able to borrow money against asset finance by a local bank, because it actually builds in the credibility of your project. Again, not many of these deals around, although there would be. I mean, if I was an equity investor, I'd expect a local bank to actually lend against the project, because that's some kind of guarantee that one of the local players know you're not going to be stuck with a grid network that can't be operated. So that was a pretty thorough review of the balance sheet products as opposed to the consumer finance products. Any specific comment on this, Piyush and Piyush first and Molly then?
No, Francois, I think you've explained it well.
Okay, thanks. I was expecting that kind of comments. Molly, is actually USA contemplating supporting any of those products?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Is USAID contemplating supporting the creation of any of these products?
We are not creating any of these specific products, but we will be announcing in a couple weeks some new partners we'll be working with in terms of some new debt vehicles specifically for the off-grid sector.
Yeah. I mean, all this says that whatever your efforts are I wish to emphasize that, irrespective of your efforts as a company to be able to structure some kind of borrowing mechanism that the bank could subscribe to, one big missing point is what USAID is just doing now, is basically have a specific pocket that is directed towards that kind of market situation. If you take a step back and look at the whole financial situation, what we have is a big pile of money ready to get invested for the development goals, and that counts in tens of billions of dollars. A large number of entrepreneurs who are ready to use that money, and no pipe, leading the money from where it is to where it's needed. And these are, the initiatives like the USAID initiative are very, very, very important elements of that happening. And this, I'm going to make a slightly more contentious statement here, but what we believe at Hystra is that as long as we can't channel debt to access to energy companies, be they pay-as-you-go companies, lantern distributors, or mini-grid operators, the return on equity is going to be far too low for actual additional equity to be brought into the industry. If you have to set aside, probably more than $50 or $60 of equity for $1 of sales, for $100 of sales, what this means is that either you make an outrageous margin, which would clearly limit the growth, or that the payback that you'll get on that equity is going to be too low. And today, that's what's happening. Equity players came into this believing that technology would solve every single issue, and that the growth would be so fast and the profits would be so big that it was worth the risk. However, it hasn't happened. So now there's a bit of a hangover in the markets for impact investors or equity investors, and they're much more careful, which I find is a pity, because the potential is there. The technology is at last mature. The distribution techniques are being fine-tuned. So the only thing that's missing is the cash engine, and the cash engine is going to be dead. Right. Any comments on the equity availability, Piyush?
Yes, I think it's a combination of factors, as you say. The industry itself hasn't covered itself in glory by overpromising and under-delivering. But at the same time, we have to hold a mirror to ourselves and see where are the weaknesses in our model, which are not really presenting ourselves to be financially attractive to equity investors. And I mean impact as much as commercial investors. And these are the sort of things I think we have to sort out our financing model. There's so much of emphasis on distribution model, but we're not thinking enough and deeply about financing, because as you rightly observed, the whole cash cycle in this business is inverted. With every single customer you originate, you're actually investing more money, and with increasing scale, you'll be digging a deeper hole for yourself. So we have to find a way of inverting this cash cycle. And yeah, I think there are models available, consumer finance, ITCOL in Bangladesh, but then also local bank financing of the type that we have started to mobilize, which I think can be applied with some effort. I don't mean to underestimate the effort it would take to convert banks who are still not getting it, as many of you rightly observed at the start of this conversation. But these are the issues that we have to focus on to present ourselves as economically attractive businesses.
Molly?
Yeah, and I'll also mention that just one critical gap that we've been seeing in terms of a company's capacity to successfully raise capital is just a lack of standardized performance data across the sector. So earlier this year, Google and the World Bank released a key performance indicator framework for pay-as-you-go companies, which is essentially a list of metrics suggested for data collection and analysis in order to begin to standardize data presented to potential financiers during a capital raise. So there's just been such large discrepancies in terms of data reporting across the sector that's really hindered investors' capacity just to complete sufficient diligence on a company in order to invest. Just wanted to note that because we've been hearing that quite a bit in terms of investor feedback.
Right. Marcus, I think we need to open to questions right now.
Yes, indeed, but you have been actually fantastic as a panel to simultaneously talk and reply to questions, not only in talking, but also in writing. Piyush, you're just very working on different channels at the same time. Congratulations to that. There's sort of one question, because we did receive some questions earlier on, and there was one interesting one about the role of securitization and bonds, which you have not touched upon. Could you shed some light on this, Francois? Because I think the first deals have come through where we can see some securitization of solar home system.
Yes. Well, I need to update my knowledge, but I mean, as I was saying in the introduction, energy being an addictive product is an ideal subprime financing mechanism, especially now that we know a lot of why subprime didn't work and what is needed to make it work. I mean, again, responsibility. One of our sponsors has been looking into this, setting up a debt fund, especially to that aspect. There is one. Sorry, it skips my mind right now, but there was actually one securitization deal that's come out on the market. Again, I mean, essentially, the Sympa deal is exactly what you should have for this. What we need, to Molly's point earlier on, is an ability to merge many Sympa deals together into a vehicle that will, on average, have better risk. And for that, you need to have a common benchmark agreement, what should be measured, and some transparency on categories of performance for the different companies. Today, the pay-as-you-go industry, notably because that's the most advanced on this issue, is not exactly in a data sharing mood, and as long as it will not be able to categorize itself in terms of quality of products, the growth of securitization is going to be limited to a few companies, because it's going to be very difficult to have a industry-wide model. But that's what clearly USAID could be doing, being a sort of repository of data and guaranteeing that they have a class of assets securitized that could be bundled together with privileged access to the financial performance of different companies or somebody else. That was a very long answer. Sorry about that.
And we did see from our audience already, there's like a Mobisol securitization deal as well.
Okay.
BB box, so that seems to be happening.
Yeah.
Molly, as François mentioned, USAID, is that something you're looking at and you see a growth in securitization happening?
It's a really interesting concept for the sector in terms of packaging deals. There's actually a really great white paper by Persistent Energy Capital. I can send that through after the call along with the KPI framework. I definitely recommend reading that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That is great. I think on the issue of, because another issue that came up in earlier questions round was about the sort of equity drying up and debt emerging. You've touched on that as well. There have been some very specific questions to Sympa and their model. And what I can assure all of you and participating in this call is that the panelists will make on a best effort way, will make themselves available for answering those questions in a document that we'll be posting on the website as we sort of slowly have to wrap up this call. So your questions will not get lost, but we will look at them after this call. I would just like to slowly wrap up now, and if there is like one key message my panelists would like you to take home, what would that be? Molly, starting with you.
I guess I'll use this time just to note that our team will be looking forward to announcing several new partners in upcoming weeks that we're working with to help launch several new blended finance facilities specifically designed for the off-grid sector. And I mean, just as a team and as an agency, we're continuing to work with partners across the market to try to scale and increase access just to flexible, affordable financing products and facilities, just appropriate for the business models and working capital of the sector.
That's very encouraging. We all look forward. Thanks for this teaser. Can you say already when you will launch this?
They should be in, we'll be doing a press release, I'd say early to mid-October.
Okay, so everybody watch this space. Piyush, one last key message.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. My key last message goes out to the impact investors or development finance institutions if they're here on this call or see this webinar later. But I spoke earlier about how the industry needs to reflect upon itself and optimize its own model and make it economically attractive to investors. But I think in equal measures, we need more and more patient capital in the sector. There's too much pressure on particularly the younger companies in the sector to achieve commercial viability and scale early. Nobody's questioning that the grid, I can talk confidently about India, but that I'm sure would be the case around the world. The grid still remains economically unprofitable. So why is it that we're putting so much pressure on off-grid technologies and energy access businesses who are really pushing the boundaries and trying to do what the grid has not been able to do, which is to reach that last mile, which all of us know is costly. So my message goes out to those impact investors and development finance institutions to sort of come forward, seize the moment, and provide that patient capital which the sector needs.
Thank you, Piyush, for this call to action. Francois, we had the pleasure of doing this series of webinars together. What are your final words?
I would say I'm pretty optimistic. I mean, provided the pay-as-you-go industry gets their act together and stop being so secretive about its performance, once we have what USAID is doing, i.e. people that are specializing in understanding and being able to give a rating to the different energy distributors, and once there is a minimum transparency and who does what, I'm sure floods of lending money are going to reach certainly the pay-as-you-go industry. The mini-grid may take a bit longer. And once you get that, you'll get more equity. It's a virtuous circle that's in the making, but we need a catalyst. And I hope that the USAID initiative is going to be the catalyst. Okay,
a lot of pressure on you, Molly. Let's watch this space when we come to the end of October. Thank you very much, Francois. Well, thank you very much to all of you for listening. It brings us to the end of this webinar and this series of webinars brought to you by the Inclusive Business Action Network, Hystra, and the Practitioner Hub for Inclusive Business. You can review and share this webinar shortly on the events webpage. We also like to invite you to sort of upcoming events and webinars. For this, you need to register at the Practitioner Hub for Inclusive Business, which will also bring you monthly themes, the latest being opportunities for inclusive business to empower women. And Anne has asked me especially for this. We need your feedback. Please watch out for the feedback request, which Anne will email shortly, and you will receive from the Practitioner Hub for Inclusive Business. Tell us what you think. Your feedback really matters to us. Suggest topics you want to be covered, and participate on the Practitioner Hub with blogs and other items. With this, we're coming to a close. I'd like to thank all of you for attending. Wish you all the best, and catch you up online on the Practitioner Hub or one of the upcoming events. Thank you very much. Goodbye.